Yeah, please. I usually, as the host of a panel discussion, you don't get to sit in the middle. You get to sit on a side. But it's no, it's okay. You give me the honor, so I'll keep it. Uh, we have uh, we have two people who can individually spend 45 minutes, and you can be completely transfixed for the entire 45 minutes. But we have 20 minutes and two people, so we will try and get into the topic as soon as possible, and I'll request both of you to also, there's a clock right here, so we can keep reminding ourselves about our time for every answer. But it's a topic that I think has been, in some ways, done to death. Everybody's talked about it. Every conversation, every panel, everything talks about hybrid. What we wanted to do today in this conversation with both of them is, and both of them have the unique advantage that they're seeing two things happen. One, they are at the front end of leading large organizations with large workforce, and therefore the workforce needs, as well as the technology that is supporting, either enabling or not enabling the workforce to operate efficiently in a hybrid model. So that's the advantage that we have on this panel. But what I'll do is, as we start this discussion, is I'll ask both of you, and maybe I'll start with you, Dhanniya, to talk about what is your, do you see this whole hybrid model to be a bit of a generational thing, in the sense that a more younger workforce prefers hybrid or work from home or whatever, virtual, whereas the older, more experienced workforce probably wants to get back to office?
Did you just end up calling us older?
I included myself, so it's...
Okay. So thanks a lot for the time, everyone. I think even before we get to the generational demographics, I think the last 2.5 years has created such a dramatic shift in just the way people look at work. Is work even worth it, right? We have all been hit by a realization that we are all mere mortals, and whatever time we spend on earth, we need to get the best of everything. The best of our relationships, the best of our association with an organization, our career, our growth, our development, all of that. So people are choosing to pick work in organizations where they get all of this together. They get social capital with their colleagues, they get human capital and opportunity to learn and develop. And in that context, I think I will drill down to your answer, that while you look at the worthiness of work, and people realizing that work is just one part of life, yes, there is a demographic shift between the Gen X and the millennials, Gen X like us and the subsequent millennials, and the Gen Z, which is now coming, which has probably started work during the pandemic. Maybe we can call them the COVID babies, if you will. So, you know, they do not have a baseline to compare. They do not know what it meant to go to office, to interact with people, to learn from people, to have organizational conflicts to resolve, none of that, right? They are in their rooms, they are on Teams, most of the time without their videos on, and they're contributing. They're just swooping in or parachuting in, delivering their part of the work and coming out. And they think that's it. You know, this is what work is. So it's very, and you know, we tried the work trend index. There was a survey conducted to understand the demographic differences. And around 31,000 employees were interviewed in 31 countries. A lot of forensics insights and digital insights that came out of Microsoft 365 and LinkedIn labor trends. And we saw that, you know, a good percentage of the Gen Z, which is the latest generation, obviously wants more flexibility, wants to work remotely, wants to be able to even work in 2 jobs at a time, not just one job. And that sort of fosters this culture of the gig economy that we are expecting to take a lot of importance moving forward. So they definitely want to be more remote, more hybrid. They think they can get the best to the table, and they want that flexibility. And whereas the Gen X and the millennials definitely feel that it is important to go to office, to meet with colleagues, because they know the beauty of social capital and what it can build for them to relate to the purpose of working for an organization. It's not just about going in and doing work, but the purpose and the mission that an organization that they're working for, and what is their contribution to it. So I think that's what is evolving.
Well, thank you for that. And this work trends index obviously is a very interesting study, and we'll probably talk about that. But Richard, you have a massive workforce right here in this city itself. So What is that workforce saying? Are you seeing a similar trend there?
Yeah, no, not all of them are in the city anymore, so we sometimes don't know where people are, and that's, I think it's true for most of us in this room. See, we don't always know where someone was. Like, for example, today I didn't know I was going to actually speak in person. I was thinking I was going to do this on video. And it's good fun to be back, and thanks to all of you for coming. So what we are seeing is a little counterintuitive, and I'm just talking about our experience since we opened up our offices. We are seeing three distinct groups, and I'm sure many of you share this observation. So the first group is the people, and not really on the age profile, but more from the number of years of experience. The people who haven't worked for long in the organization, and what Dhanniya was referring to as people who have just started working now, there seems to be a greater desire to come to office. While they are digitally native and actually are much more comfortable working remotely, but there is a desire to build your career, meet other people, learn things. So there is much more eagerness and interest in coming to office. The next group, who have spent probably 3 or 4 years already in organizations, have established infrastructure. And I think the infrastructure and the stage in your life is very important. They have family responsibilities. They have a reasonable infrastructure which allows them to work, whereas the first group still struggles with shared accommodation, not being able to have space for themselves, and so on and forth. So the second group is more inclined to not coming back and preferring to work remotely. And then you have the leadership group, who spent probably 10 years plus, who are coming for sake of building their teams, for the sake of running the organizations. The point which I think all of us should understand is that we have to be flexible, because this can change. As things evolve, I think companies need to give space for people to adjust their schedules to what is needed, rather than us deciding for them. And I think one of our biggest learning is that you keep listening to employees, you take inputs from data and analytics which you have, as well as the other insights you get, and you build your work practice to accommodate the changing needs of the workforce, not forgetting the needs of your client, so you can't run it in isolation. But I think it's a balance, and I think all of us as company leaders will have to play with this balance for the next couple of years or so, till we reach some kind of an evolved state on this model. I think it's still too early for us to call which way it is going to go.
But Richard, I think the other thing, and to your point about how this is evolving, the other thing that we've seen change very dramatically over the last 2.5 years as we went through this transition is I think two things. One is we saw the massive rise in well-being issues. Physical well-being was a given that we were going through a pandemic, but mental well-being issues, as well as this interesting attrition story. Is there a parallel, is there a sort of a correlation between these two things of virtual, non-physical connected workplaces and these issues cropping up?
See, what we went through over the last 2 years, and 2 years of pandemic, has been extremely exhausting for everybody. On one hand, we had to handle our own selves, and there was infections, and families went through trouble, and so on and so forth. Secondly, it is extremely challenging to keep things going in a remote way. No matter how much we like the flexibility and the advantages which we got, it has been a big struggle. And I think people ended up spending much more time they would have normally ended up spending if they were just going to office. And most people managed that, but it came at a cost. And what we saw is that it had both impacts. We should not underestimate the physical impact. It had physical impacts as well as mental impacts of isolation, of not having your colleagues around you, not having your support structures, not being able to see your manager for 2 years. It took a strain. And at the same time, companies, I think, went through kind of a slow pace of hiring. So there were a sudden burst of demand. A sudden burst of demand, along with people getting tired of what they were doing, led to the attrition spurt we saw over the last year or so. So I think in a way it was linked, though I don't know how much of a direct correlation was, but I think they were definitely linked. And then it started a circular logic that you left from one company, the company started hiring, and people found that I will change. And interestingly, what we're seeing when we talk to people, they are not necessarily changing for any particular reason, except that they got bored or tired, or they thought that the next company was better, and now they want to come back to their prior companies. So I think, in the sense, the good which I saw out of it is that companies realize that impact of well-being, and I think there is much more understanding and much more flexibility and spend which companies are going to do on well-being, both physical and mental, which I think is a great thing, which was badly needed. And the second part is, I think, each employee has understood that work is not everything. You see much more tolerance for people taking time off for family issues, or people taking time off to take care of kids, or people just taking time off because they are saying I'm burnt out, which I think was unthinkable for many of us, say 2-3 years back. So I think a greater tolerance for each other, a greater tolerance from companies, and the increase in spend is a positive impact. And you can also see that with offices resuming and people coming back, there is kind of a slowdown in the pace of the attrition. So I think the problem is kind of converging and solving itself.
Actually, and to that point, Dhanniya, I want to come back to this, to the index that you spoke about, the work trends index, or other research that you're doing. Are there any points that you're finding organizations do well to be able to manage, now that, like Richard said, people are coming back to work and so on, to be able to bring back culture, to be able to bring back the kind of togetherness that people might have lost over this period of time? Or even in a virtual workplace, how do you bring back this culture that organizations were building more actively earlier?
Yeah, and thanks, Andy. I think I'm going to build on what Richard Lobo just talked about, the importance of mental health and well-being. And at Microsoft, I think we have really realized that value because we work across so many countries in a synchronous, asynchronous mode. People at, during daytime in one place, catching up on that work, and in their nighttime, not in the same place, all of this, right? And what is productivity? Productivity is not just about an output metric. It's about also having a very good state of mind so that you're able to sustain and be productive. And hence, mental health becomes extremely critical. So we have actually gone overboard on this. I don't think overboard is the right term. We have actually focused quite a bit on this. And it also depends on the type of groups at Microsoft where these policies are being formed. So we have our development teams, we have our customer support teams, we have deployment, we have sales teams. And for each team, it's very different. The type of work culture that gets propagated for people to be in a state of best mental health and thereby most productive. So if it's a sales team, and if assuming they're managing a government sector or a healthcare sector, where the customers are coming to work, right? You can't be sitting in office and say, hey, I'll do a Teams meeting with you, because they want you to be with them. So then it is important to, for these employees to understand the importance of being with customers, and that is being propagated in that organization. So there's a strong connection being formed between the customer and the sales or the post-sales guy. Likewise, even within intra or inter-organization, there are strong ties and weak ties. So as Richard said, the earlier Gen X and millennials, and as I said, already there is a baseline, they know their circles, they know their cross teams. So there is a strong tie there. You can just pick up a phone and say, hey, can you get this done for me? And it will get done. Whereas for a new Gen Z who's come into work, they may not even know what is a virtual team they can potentially leverage to get that work done. So that's a very weak connection, right? And for that team, it is important to see more people, to know who's the face that I've been interacting with, and leverage one another for help. And that's where I think, at Microsoft, we have created something called Viva. Some of you might have heard about it. It gives insights. Basically, it captures data, not giving away data about who did what, but trends on leveraging your Outlook or Teams, etc. Which are the teams with whom you have best connections? Are managers doing one-on-ones with their employees? Are teams that are supposed to collaborate well, doing it well enough, or they're keeping away from one another? Right? So those things are being monitored as trend lines. And we put a lot of focus on the manager being the fosterer of culture. So the management model, as Satya calls it, model, coach, and care. So for him to understand in his work group, these guys have some problems because they have elderly at home who need to be taken care of, or children who have not yet been vaccinated. And hence, we need to give them some flexibility. And likewise, somebody else enjoys coming to office. So foster environments where you're creating a Friday, a drink, going out for drinks environment or whatever. So the manager plays a very, very critical role in weaving this together based on the flexibility requirements of the team. And and Satya talked about this. He talked about it in the Wharton Future of Work conference. He said he is doing a lot himself because these policies and culture actually permeates from top. So he says he is doing a lot himself to stop sending emails on weekends, right? As well as making it a prerogative for managers to make it clear to their employees that late night emails need not be responded to. It is very clear. Late night mails need not be responded to. We set aside learning hours or focus time in our calendar. And it is pushed on us saying, take those breaks, take those focus times, because we also need to invest in self-learning. And all the time, if you're running around solving problems, either yourself or your customers, you're not spending the time on self-learning, right? Those are things we do. If it's a half-hour meeting, we set aside 5 or 10 minutes gap between meetings. Intentionally, our calendars are set that way. So a lot of things that we are doing within Microsoft to ensure that the burnout and mental health of employees is taken care, and I think a lot of that culture definitely needs to come from top.
So actually, Dhanniya, I think both of you have seen this, that to a large extent, this entire conversation about virtual or work from home is a luxury that service industries are able to afford, right? But you manage a sales structure as well, where people have to go to work, where people have to go to a customer office and so on. How do you balance this thing? Because I could say that I could, as a salesperson, I could argue that you have all the comforts in the world sitting at home. I have to go out every day.
Yeah, it's a hybrid paradox, and it's a diverse economy. So there are industries where you have to go to work because of your customers or because of your own type of work. You can't expect a healthcare worker to be sitting at home and providing services, right? So it's a very good point, and what as we as Microsoft hold as a philosophy is empowering every organization and every person on this planet to achieve more, which means in a manufacturing environment or in a healthcare environment, if the worker definitely needs to be in the factory or in the hospital, is there a possibility that we can leverage technology or give guidance to them that technology can be leveraged in situations to be able to work hybrid? Okay, so I'm sure many of you have heard about HoloLens being used for remote surgeries, assisted surgeries, where the subject matter expert doctor sits in one city. We recently did this with a hospital in Bangalore. The subject matter expert sat in Mysore, and the doctor who was actually operating was out of Bangalore. And it was remote assisted surgery where the other person could see the patient and guide them through the cancer surgical intervention that had to be taken care of. So that's a great example of technology coming in to help a hybrid work environment. Likewise, most of you have seen IoT and how the factory of the future, and how with a digital twin you can still manage to do many things without being in the place where the correction or the preventive maintenance needs to be done. So there are lots of things, and even simple things like our own meeting rooms. We have got to a point where Teams meeting rooms, we have physical presence, like 4 of us are sitting here, but 10 of us are online, right? But it creates such an inclusive experience with the cameras, with the spatial audio. So if there is, my presence is digitally mapped, and if there is somebody sitting remotely and I'm supposed to be sitting next to him, then the way I hear his voice is as if you're speaking to me, not as if it's coming out of a central speaker. So it's a merging of a physical and a virtual world, and it's a great role that technology can play into converging these things.
So in effect, what you're saying is that you're trying to make it hybrid for everybody, regardless of the nature of the job. Yeah. Actually, that brings me to the last point, and maybe we'll keep it 30 seconds for both of you, if you will. So Richard, hybrid is what we are all living with today. Is this equilibrium, or is this just a point in time before something else comes in?
I think it's a point in time, and I'll just leave 3 points with the audience, and I think all these 3 points are important. One is economics, and I think economics will determine how this goes. Companies will save on certain costs, certain benefits will be passed on to people. So those working remote will have different benefits from those working in person, and that will kind of take care of compensation for the added pain you go to for commuting or traveling, etc. So I think economics will play a big role. Today companies are not really venturing too much into that, but I think that's one thing which we have to keep in mind. The second one is technology. I think technology will very rapidly change and evolve to support this new way of working. And I think we are just scratching the surface in terms of what technology can do, and we are underestimating the power. And I think companies will innovate. A lot more things will come up, and new ideas will come. And thirdly, I think each of us will adapt. And as a species, we have adapted to various things. And I think this is another thing which human adaptation will make a difference. So economics, technology, and adaptation is 3 points I would like to leave you as food for thought for later.
Thank you very much. That's I'll try and remember that and quote it in all my client presentations in future.
I hope I get some revenue out of that.
But thank you both for this conversation. I think it's very interesting that at least my takeaway from this is the point that both of you, one is this last 3 points that I noted down from you, by the way, Richard. But also Dhanniya, what you mentioned with regard to the fact that every role can eventually be made hybrid in some form or manner or the other. I think that's an important takeaway for us. The board is saying time's up, and thank you very much everyone for being a wonderful audience here.
Thank you. Thanks a lot.